Okay, so when we start getting ready for our retirement, we need to work through a bit of a process. And we start off by working out what your expenses are. Not what you've read in the paper, not something that someone's told you, it's what your particular expenses are going to be. Then we need to work out how we're going to maximise our other income. Now, absolutely we're going to be looking at investments, but we're talking about all sorts of things out there that you can access that you might not be aware of. Then we'll look to minimise tax. And it works like this, that if you're needing to generate, say, $54,000 a year in normal investments, and we were paying tax, then if you think about it, you're going to have to generate maybe $70,000 a year, pay the tax, and you're left with $54,000 a year. So if we could set things up so you don't pay tax, then we can generate a lower rate of return. And what does that mean? Less risk. And that's what it's all about. If we can achieve our outcomes without making risky investments and get the job done, that's much safer, rather that than potentially lose your money. And the final thing we're going to do is we want to reduce the fees. So that's the other thing. We'll talk about fees a little bit later on, but if the biggest drain, if you like, are investment fees and different sorts of things that you might pay along the way. So if we can keep those down, then you're absolutely going to come out ahead. All right, so when we talk about retirement costs, the first thing is we assume that you've repaid all of your debts. Now, you'll never convince me that moving into retirement with debt is a good thing. All of those strategies that may have worked for you once with negative gearing into properties and all those fancy things are fantastic when you're earning, $50, $60, $100, $200,000 a year. But when you're not earning any income, most of these strategies fall off. And if you're paying the bank 4 or 5% interest, it's dead money as far as you're concerned because there's no tax break, so we get rid of debt. We're going to work on a regular expense figure of between $45,000 and $70,000 a year for couples, and for singles between $35,000 and $50,000 per year. Now, everyone's going to be different. You're going to have variation. If you've still got kids at home, then you're going to be paying more for utilities and bits and pieces like that. If you're lucky to invest or have other properties, a beach house somewhere down south, then that's obviously going to add to the expenses. And equally, if you've got kids that live over in other states, you're going to want to visit them, so that travel becomes a regular part of your retirement expense. And then finally, expensive habits. Perhaps you like the odd smoke or two, fine, but we need to factor those in, and that's where we see some variations in the cost of living. Now, here's the thing, folks. These expenses change with age. I've got bad news for you. When you get into your late 70s and 80s, things wear out and bits drop off. Now, I don't know which bits are going to drop off for you, but I can tell you that your cost of living will decline. You don't need another blender. You don't need another drill. All these things disappear. You basically end up with having to cover things like food, accommodation, energy, transport, and medical costs in the latter years of retirement. So understand that your costs are going to decline by about 30% in the latter years of retirement. Now, over and above that, we need to provide for the trips and the car changeovers and all those sorts of little bits and pieces. Things that you haven't thought about that we need to think about ultimately are accommodation costs. If you need to move into an aged care facility, do you have the funds for that? Or what sort of arrangements you might be looking at in the latter years of retirement if you get to that stage. Understand too that as you age, the amount of capital you need is going to diminish. Right? Because if you're making decisions at 65 years of age, that's a lot different to the needs and capital requirements for someone that's 85 years of age. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration. Now, when it comes to working out your expenses, going back to our first point, it's really important to get a good handle on exactly what your expenses are. Now, I'm very wary of the pluck-a-duck approach. Oh, look, I think I'm going to need $70,000 a year to live on. That's fine. The problem with that is that if we're generating $70,000 a year and you don't need it, we've probably incurred tax, we've probably messed up Centrelink benefits, we're doing all sorts of things, and if all that money's sloshing around in a bank account earning next to nothing, that's not smart use of your funds. And similarly, and obviously, understating what your income needs are is a problem too, because we end up having to cash out investments when we weren't expecting to. So take some time and work out exactly what your expenses are. Now, fortunately, as part of your Netplan package, there's a really detailed spreadsheet that you can download now. And if you work through that spreadsheet, you will see that we've got pretty much every single expense listed. things like your pool costs, the pet vet fees, your cup of coffee in the morning with your friends, all those things are there, and you simply plug in the number for where you spend the money. So it's $5 a cup of coffee every day, you chuck it in the daily expense. And magically in front of you, it'll be working out your total annual amount, broken down to monthly and fortnightly and weekly. So very useful tool, but make sure you put everything in there. It's probably best not to put in what you think it's going to be. That's the other little trick. What we've discovered is that people's lifestyles don't change a lot between work and when they move into retirement. You think they might, and there will be some subtle differences, but perhaps not surprising. If you like going out for a game of golf with your friends every Friday, you'll still do the same in retirement. So put in what you're spending now, and there you'll go, having a reasonably accurate picture of where things are.